also a key member of the Greater Manchester Patient Safety Research Collaboration. So he has a long track record and extensive experience in conducting research to understand complex health systems, primarily using qualitative methodology from socio-technical theoretical perspectives. So Mark's research has spanned different parts of the patient care journey, including lots of work in care transitions, which of course is a key point of weakness in the care continuum for patients. And obviously he is very, very well published in these areas of patient safety, including socio-technical systems. So I'm going to hand over to Mark to take over and then introduce the topic to you. And I know he's got quite an exciting interactive session planned today. So there'll be breakout rooms and some other opportunities for you to talk to each other and to Mark. So without delaying any further, I'm going to hand over to Mark.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you ever so much. And thank you for that introduction. Just to say, yeah, really pleased to be here, really pleased to be able to do this. This is sort of, I suppose, explicitly an introduction to sociotechnical theory and how it works within patient safety research, or how I've used it within patient safety research, and touching on the research of others as well. In terms of, I mean, this is very much my personal viewpoint, and and in that respect, I think it's a sort of, understandably a partial and limited account, but hopefully you'll get something out of this. One of the things I'm not going to be talking about today is AI, because I don't know anything about him, and it's not an area of my research that an area of research I've covered. But we will be looking at lots of other technology. So, Sophie, you can move to the next slide, please. That's great. And the next slide. So, what we're going to be talking about through today's session is we're going to explore the implementation of technology in healthcare, develop some understanding of what socio-technical systems are, introduce some theoretical perspectives, and look at how social technical theory has been utilized in patient safety research, and look at the implications for patient safety within that, or all of that. Next slide, please. So we're breaking this down into, I'm going to be doing a bit of chat at the beginning, just to introduce some of the concepts and ideas. We're going to have a breakout session about halfway through. We're going to ask you to do a little bit of work, thinking about what a socio-technical system might look like in healthcare. And then I'm going to sort of take you through some of the perspectives around the theories, finishing up with some of the implications for what patient safety research is, and maybe a bit of chance for some closing thoughts at the end if we have time. Next slide, please. So, and in fact, move on to the next one. So firstly, I want to think about innovation and implementation. This is a quotation from a novel I read earlier in this year. It's a novel, very interesting novel, which is about a wind, actually, and about, but it's also a novel about progress and about innovation and how technology is used across generations and by humans. And one of the characters in the novel says this: there is a word or two that I've taken out with the 3 dots, but basically, yes, we invent and we run around to sweep up invention's mess. And the concept and the idea within this is that technology is often implemented without consideration for its intended and unintended consequences, which in itself then leads to some sort of, change, adaptation, workarounds, and indeed, maybe, possibly some sort of mess. Next slide, please. For those of you who are as old as I can remember the AOL You've Got Mail, and when email first arrived in our lives, as it were. And one of the things of technology is there's this promise within technology that it's going to decrease work. It's going to, I'm old enough to remember the 60s when we were promised that leisure time would be incredible because, robots would be doing all our jobs for us. The idea that technology can decrease work and it will save time. And I read something recently, which is a non-academic thing, which talked around how, when you consider email itself, email is considerably cheaper, quicker, easier, cheaper than sending a letter. But because of that, almost, it's resulted in huge numbers of highly skilled people spending time writing and responding to emails, a proliferation of messages, the dreaded reply to all, and the sort of sense of being presentness or needing to be present all the time to pay attention to email. And in fact, it takes up large amounts of time of our lives. Next slide, please. So within the implementation of technology in healthcare, that has, involved a lot of belief that it will improve treatment and care. And in many ways, that's the case. It does, it can potentially improve treatment and care. But there's often been a push to change and innovate, a top-down implementation, and a focus on the technology, that if we just change the technology, that will solve the problem. If we just fire some technology, and I mean, the original NFIT EHR systems that were pushed out into hospitals, this was very much the case. A sense that, well, if it doesn't work, we'll just patch it, we'll just fix one part of the system, we won't look at the whole system. A sense that one size fits all, and that all of that maybe ignores that complexity of the contexts in which technology is implemented. And I'm going to be talking a lot about context throughout this session today. It's all that is left, again, to the sense that, it's been, has it made safe care, or has it made it more difficult to care safely for people? There's workarounds again, and non-implementation and abandonment, dilution of interventions. And it becomes that people there's a lack of perceived value, therefore, in the technology. Next slide, please. Now, I know a while ago in one of these sessions there was a session on complexity in healthcare, and I just want to touch on complexity, because complexity is important in terms of if healthcare is complex and it's a complex system, implementing technology into that is going to be in itself add further complexity. Next slide, please. So healthcare is complex because it has a number of bits to it. It has the environment, the space in which you put it, the people are involved in that, and those people all have different motivations. They all have different needs. They all have different goals. There is the technology itself, and when we talk about technology, that can be as simple as a very, very simple piece of equipment in hospital, a thermometer, or anything, not just sort of machines and sort of advanced technology or information technology, but it's all of those things. And then the various tasks and processes that people do. And within that, there's also this sense that people have either do or don't have agency and power to do those things. What is the capacity of people who actually do that? Often power is unevenly distributed. People don't maybe have the be able to achieve that. And so I think there's a sort of, there's a sort of psychosocial element to the complexity of healthcare. There are physical, psychological, social aspects to its complexity. Next slide, please. So this is some of the ideas around that complexity of complex open systems that healthcare is. It's dynamic and interactive. It has multiple bits to the system. It's adaptive because it requires often huge variation to respond to different things. Human beings are not rational. They're not necessarily. They're not predictable. And healthcare in itself is not predictable. So it has to be adaptive to things. It's non-linear. Things don't work in a straight line. Anyone who works in healthcare will know that things um, don't happen in that sort of way. And outcomes emerge from that complex interplay of different parts to the system. So it's emergent. Um, and because it's for those interactions, yeah, it's unpredictable and unexpected. I just to note that you will see in various of these slides there are references at the bottom of them. At the end of this talk, there are sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback there. I don't know if that was. And at the end of the talk, there are some references, a list of references, which you can. The slides are going to be shared, and you can record it, so they'll be available later on. Next slide, please. And in fact, we'll move straight on to the next slide. So I wonder if just basically for a couple of minutes, if people could just put into the chat, I'm sort of interested in the technologies that you encounter in health contexts as either a healthcare professional or a researcher or a patient. We're all patients at some point in our lives, I'm sure. What sort of technologies do you encounter within there? I mean, just put into the chat, please. Thank you, Beth, for the NHS app. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Yeah. We've got medicines, we've got NHS app, email. Yeah. The text reminders, yes, absolutely. Yes, it's interesting around. I think there are a lot of the digital self-care monitoring is very much a thing that's coming forward. We've got GP online consult, electronic patient records. We'll talk a little about that later as well. So that's a good one, obviously. Electronic prescription. It's interesting, isn't it? Electronic prescribing is something which is almost now taken for granted. The idea of having a green piece of paper to take to the pharmacist. Datexes, yeah. And again, apps to reorder repeat prescriptions, someone said, which is yeah, patients using different apps in that respect. Nerve center, which I think is the new EPR system, isn't it, in hospitals? Thank you. That's brilliant. I mean, it's good to reflect on that, and I think we had a really wide range of different things coming through there. Yeah, absolutely. Clocks is someone's put clocks and time, and it's absolutely. This is really interesting. So we'll move on from that, but that's really brilliant to know that people are engaging with or thinking around those sorts of technologies. The NHS has obviously in the 10-year plan a huge push towards digital transformation. And a lot of the things that you've talked about there come under this. I'm not going to click on these links, but again, because they're in the slides, they will be available to you. And these are just two examples of some of the things that are within the NHS digital transformation. And you can click on those links and go to them. One of which is around using electronic health records to further pursue clinical workflows and to get people moved through the system much more quickly around heart failure. one of the things within this, and in fact, the second one round, particularly, which is around people having fast access to services for things like menopause or prostate problems. One of the things within this, I think, is a push towards timely, to push towards speed, to push towards better, equal access to things, and a push towards standardization. And some of those things are really, really great and are really important. But on some of those things, that might in itself create other problems, particularly perhaps within the sort of standardization. But yeah, there's a massive push within NHS at the moment for digital transformation. Next slide, please. So that was a sort of like overview of technology and complexities within healthcare. The next bit I really want to focus on is what do we mean by sociotechnical, and what is sociotechnical. So if we go to the next slide, please. So this is a one of many descriptions of what we might consider sociotechnical or technical use of technology and understandings of it. The first of those is I wouldn't go down the line of is a sort of deterministic viewpoint. It's a viewpoint that says technology is stable, technology is okay. We just improve the technology. If it doesn't work, we either change it, we adapt it, and we focus on the training of the individual. So we fix the technology, we fix the people. We don't need to. It's always going to be a sort of like linear process of bringing technology in, either adapting it or changing it, or adapting the people. Other theories are more interactional and see that technology is just one part of a system, and technology is shaping people, and people are organizations, and people are shaping technology. And there's an interaction between the things, but it's still seeing them potentially as discrete things and still seeing them as separate things. Interdependent theories tend to see people and technology as reciprocally and recursively related, and that they are, so there is a sort of a process happening. Technology in itself and the implementation of technology, therefore, is a sort of social process. And there is this dynamic connection. And then as a consequence, there's sort of negotiation, there's conflict, perhaps, when we bring in technology into these things. Next slide, please. So therefore, looking at socio-technical system, recursive, reciprocally and recursive related describes a dynamic and independent system where the components are mutually influencing each other, and that interaction is repeating and evolving over time, often creating a sort of feedback loop. And those relationships exist simultaneously. You're not getting sort of an output from one. It's the interaction and that is causing any sort of output. There's not an input at the beginning and an output at the end. It's through that interaction. So socio-technical systems focus upon the social and the human agency and the technology, not as independent and separate systems, but as part of a social network, as part of a network in which things are embedded. And it's not static as well. Things are going to move about within it. And technology within that system is just one part of that complexity. And linking back to the complexity we were thinking about earlier. Next slide, please. So the implications for research, therefore, may well be within understanding that social process. So we're not looking to measure the effect upon technology or how is adopted or resisted or not. We're looking to understand what it is about, what it is, the ways in that technology is used within contexts. What is the recursive nature of that in the wider contexts? How it's how it's being adapted. Adaptability is really important within that. What is the social processes and practices, the work practices around the implementation of the technology, and that therefore, as a consequence, the outcomes from it are going to be non-linear. They're going to be contextually bound. They're within that. Next slide, please. I want to introduce another concept, which is called social materiality, which is something which basically is a combination of the material properties of the technology and social processes. Some people have thought of technology as being sort of like not not fixed and stable, that therefore it's so fluid that therefore we can't look at the social processes. And various people have going back to Hutchby and other people have thought of technology as having some element of fixed quality that therefore allows any difference, any change to be assigned to social processes and contexts. So technology therefore offers us what are called affordances, because there's bits of it within the material properties of it through interaction with human agents that allows certain things to happen and certain things to come to be used. So the interconnectedness between the technology and organizational systems and people allows the possibility for that to shape human action and to be shaped by the different processes as well. And as a consequence, new rules, new conventions, new things happen out of that. I mean, one example I give there is of the possibility of a patient clinical record system. You bring in a new system and it might actually redistribute how clinical activity and clinical work happens. So the technology has shaped how people do things, and how people do things will then shape how the technology. So that's almost perfectly timed, 25 minutes from me. And now it's going to be your turn. So next slide, please. In fact, move on to we're going to conceptualize a sociotechnical system. So you're going to be put into breakout rooms. I'll chat for a little bit so that some of you can assign you to a breakout room. And in your breakout rooms, I would like you to see if you can conceptualize what the elements of a sociotechnical system might be for one of the situations. And I think Sobia may be able to put the slide with the situations up in your breakout room for you. You can come up with any situation. You can come up with one that's more fairly familiar to yourself, but a healthcare situation. So the examples I've got are repeat prescribing in general practice, follow-up care in primary care following hospitalization for an acute condition, prescribing in primary care for a long-term condition, patient self-monitoring and management of chronic illness, discharge from critical care to a general hospital ward, and the other one is a referral pathway. So if you could, once Sobia has put you into your breakout rooms, we'll give you sort of 10 minutes, take one of those or take another healthcare situation familiar to yourself and see if you can come up with all the elements and bits and pieces that might be part of that socio-technical system.
You ready for me to do that now?
Yes, please.
Mark, could you paste into the chat the different scenarios that you gave us so that we won't be able to see that slide, I don't think.
Try to do that right now.
Sorry.
That's okay. No worries. Right, I've done that into the chat.
I'm just going to pause the recording.
Feedback to me, on what you got out of that and what you came up with, basically. I don't know if we could have some volunteers just to chip in, and we'll just take a few points for the next 5 or 10 minutes or so, just to see how people found out what they came up with. So, anyone prepared to go first? Anna Taylor, I think we've got there.
Hi. We were talking about the discharge from critical care to a regular ward, and we took the example that the patients can be moved between two different systems of two different software systems. So as well as there could be paper and software, we took the example of two different software systems. So we said that the information gathering and transfer of information about the patient from critical care to another ward has to be done by a human, probably. AI is not there yet, and it would be summarised. And there's lots of different elements to continuity of care where they're talking about medicines, nursing, or medical care. So the person receiving that information and transferring it into the other software needs a level of understanding of what that data means and how it translates into care. I said there's lots of organisational factors that need to be understood. So the person summarising needs to understand how the other system works and what their protocols, procedures, and what their other areas might not align with what happens in critical care. There are a lot of human factors involved, so accountability for the information and the process, and there's a time element to it all. Can it happen at the right time, and when does that transfer happen, and is patient flow really lined up for the process? Is it designed well? So we were talking about overall, really, there should be a standardization of systems, and it's how well they might have operationalized a systems engineering approach to it.
No, really, really interesting. And as you say, it's that combination of people, the tasks, the technology, but then how you do those processes through that. I like the fact you picked up on the idea of time. I think that's really, really important because there's time critical parts to that process and that system, as well as being, time is just time to do things, but also certain things will be time critical within that process. Really, really helpful. Thank you. I'm going to reveal that I've slightly cheated with this, in that some of the options and things I gave you are things which I know that have been research around sociotechnical approaches from, and in fact, my colleague Richard Bourne and I did some work around the step down to critical care from a socio-technical perspective. But everything you've come up with is fantastic. Thank you for that. Anybody else would like to, or would someone else like to say something, please, or feedback in some way? I know we had other hands up. I've got another hand up here. Is it Gochi? Gochi, sorry, yes. Thank you.
We had a discussion around repeat prescriptions in primary care.
Mm-hmm.
And we had many observations based either on personal experience or experiences within the system as a prescriber. And we were describing how the system could work if you went through the NHS app, but how people are still relying on paper-based systems, that prescription slip, either picking it up from the GP surgery, walking it to the pharmacist, and then coming back to pick it up, or phoning through to get that generated. Because there's sometimes a distrust of the system, the NHS app, or a lack of understanding of what that can do. And then there's the example of someone trusting the system and being told that things are ready at the pharmacy, and then getting to the pharmacist and then having it all being reviewed and brought together in front of the person collecting the prescription. So the systems don't align. What happens once it's approved in primary care to what happens in the pharmacy. And then we just briefly talked about around what might be the patient safety risks in terms of generating these prescriptions regularly without medication reviews, or without just some tests that might need to be done in between. Like we talked about hypertension, treating hypertension without regularly checking blood pressure or kidney function, stuff like that. So yeah, the gaps in the app, gaps in the paper system, and lack of trust in the app.
Yeah, and I think also you touched on something really, really important there, is that it's not actually, or I said, conceptualize a system, but actually it's not one system, is it? Because you've got the system that's happening in GP land, you've got the system that's happening within the pharmacy. And so it's complicated even more because you've got different things moving around each other. And I think when you get into hospital-based things, that becomes a really much the case, because you have sort of like, overlapping complexity, because you've got different departments and different specialities, etc., etc. No, really interesting, and thank you for that. Really helpful. Anybody else would like to raise their hand? I can't see everybody. Oh, I've got Misha.
Hi, Mark.
Hi.
We were talking about same thing as Anna's group, the discharge from critical care general hospital. And from a personal note, I was wondering whether problems around or between the members of the MDT is considered as part of the sociotechnical system. We were talking about the potential points of failure within the communication between the two settings, maybe because of handover, and also about the language between critical care than the general ward settings, the equipment, but also the competencies between the two sites. And finally, it's how about the patient, from a patient's perspective, the transition of one-to-one nursing with lots of equipment to different ratio and different environment.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, absolutely all of those things. And I think you touched on a really important thing there about roles. And roles are part of the system, aren't they? They're part of that, you've got different people with different roles and different ambitions for those roles, if you like. It's so nursing staff and pharmacy staff and medical staff. I know when we did that work in critical care, the step down, the one-to-one nursing care that you get in there, and also from a pharmacy point of view, the pharmacists in critical care have far fewer patients to deal with than they have down at the wards, where they've got perhaps 3 or 4 wards to look after at the same time. So yeah, the roles and how people negotiate their roles around each other as well, I think really, really, really important. And there's been some work around socio-technical systems and professionalism and professional identities as well, which I think is really valuable. We'll get probably a chance for one more group or one more person to feedback, if anyone is. I'm not going to push people if they don't want to, but because I mean, doing the activity is probably the most important part. But is there anybody else who'd like to feedback? Doesn't have to be. Okay, we can move on then. Let's move on. Sabia, could you go to slide 23, which is the next part? So in this last bit there, I want to sort of like take through from that. We've talked about complexity in healthcare. We've looked at what a socio-technical system is. One of the things I want to now focus upon is looking at some of the research that's been done from patient safety, from socio-technical perspectives in patient safety. Quite a lot of this research is mine. I apologise for that, but I do reference quite a lot of other people as well. And it's next slide, please. So socio-technical approaches can focus on technology, people, and context as interdependent, as we talked about before. We're not aiming to fix one part without reference to the context. And in fact, I think in all the examples you gave me just when you were talking back to me, the context was the really important part, wasn't it? And help understand the system in which the technology is implemented. Next slide, please. So this is 2 pieces of research that myself and colleagues did around the use of prescribing safety indicators in 2 settings. Prescribing safety indicators are statements that describe patterns of prescribing that may or may not be hazardous and may be are best avoided. And the indicators can be embedded into dashboards or can be accessible through a patient electronic record. And then they can be accessed to see if patients are at risk or which patients are at risk and actions taken to improve their safety. So the first study we did was in general practice. It was a practice-based and used a practice-based pharmacist, and that was called SMASH. And the second one was in prison settings. And really is that just there's some findings that we got from that. And that in the general practice space, it was very much that, yes, the evidence in the dashboard could be translated into medicine safety activities. So we're taking the technology and utilizing that in the way that pharmacists and other people responded. But there was, things about engagement, things about collaborating within that, and happening within a wider context of what medicine safety was doing. Because when they got the information, they then had to act upon it. So that the technology was showing them the information about patients at risk, but then people had to act. So they had to build relationships, they had to communicate with other people, and it led to changes in work practices. It led to people doing different things. And particularly at the center of that, as I was just saying earlier, there was this change of a professional role in what a practice-based pharmacist might be able to take upon. And it was part of an evolution. We were doing this research around the time that practice-based pharmacists were coming in through NHS England, through other schemes as well. And that was very much the case, a change in the role. In the prison setting, we had a similar processing, but the dashboard was accessible from the patient electronic record. It wasn't a separate system like SMASH. And again, we found that we needed to have collaboration. It was very, very, very much about whether there was buy-in from different professional groups. it was often left to 1 or 2 individuals to do the work. New work processes were introduced into the organisational context to undertake the thing, but there were some real challenges within what was happening, and it was very, very important to see and understand this is a technological innovation happening within a very complex environment. And we did this work on just the back of the pandemic. And prisons, as many people will know, prison healthcare really suffered through the pandemic, and there were lots and lots of challenges that were associated with that, but also associated generally with prisons work. Next slide, please. So this is a couple of other pieces of work that we did that were around the from general practice, again looking at the use of clinical decision support in general practice in the first of these studies. And clinical decision support alerts based around prescribing, again, pop-up alerts embedded within the electronic health record. And we found this was very much happening within a context of workflows and work practices, that there was a very, very complex interplay between the technology, between prescribers, between patients, and between patient populations. It was used differently for different people. It was used differently for different populations. And what we found was that I talked earlier about social materiality. We found that affordances were embedded in the CDS, and that they were allowing people to do certain things with the technology, but that wasn't happening if they didn't engage with it as well. So there was this sort of like system going on, and that it wasn't happening in a vacuum. The CDS wasn't being used as a vacuum, or even in a vacuum of the sort of safety work. It was happening within the culture, the safety culture in primary care, within general practices. And then the other study that we did a few years back was on the discharge medicine service, I think is now sometimes known as TCAM, transfer of care about medicines. Originally this was called e-referral, where basically a discharge notification doesn't just go to the GP, it also goes to the community pharmacy. And in fact, the community pharmacy's also got a alert when one of their patients was admitted to hospital. It was specifically on patients who had those set boxes or had blister packs made up by the pharmacist. And it was proved very useful to the pharmacist. The pharmacist liked it, but it was very much a new system that required a lot of collaboration between different people within different stakeholders, practice-based pharmacists, GP practice-based pharmacists, community pharmacists, GPs. And there was a lot of fragmentation across that network, but it was a network. It was a system evolving. And I think, someone was saying earlier about different systems. You've got the pharmacy, you've got GP. This was very much the case. It wasn't just one socio-technical system. It was multiple layered upon each other. And again, there was adaptation to work. There was adaptation in terms of new relationships being developed across that system. And we used the socio-technical theory to understand what was going on there. Next slide, please. I want to take you through 3 sort of theoretical approaches now. And we're going to start with one that is broadly called systems thinking, which broadly comes out of the sort of safety 2 concepts of Holger-Nagel. Next slide, please. So systems thinking is about exploring holistically the characteristics of a system. It's moving away from that focus on single elements that we talked about earlier. It's looking at the relationships and dependencies and understanding how outcomes might emerge from the interactions that happen across those things. One of the things within systems thinking is a thing called STEW, or systems thinking for everyday work, which people may have come across, which is a way of informing us and learning about complex systems. And if you go to the next slide, there's a nice little diagram about that. So just to take you round this little circle, systems thinking for everyday work, or STEW, takes these 6 concepts, as it like. The foundation concept is that you can't just improve part of the system, you have to improve the overall system. You can't just focus on one component or one individual element within it. In doing that, in trying to understand, in doing your research or in doing your safety intervention, you should take the perspective of different people. And we talked earlier about that connection between different people, the different responsibilities, the different roles, the different needs and goals of different people. And having those different perspectives is really, really valuable in this sort of approach. Look at the system and the work conditions. What is people don't just work, get a task and get on with it. There is different demands upon people's time, different capacities, different availability of resources to do their work. There are constraints around people's work. So the work conditions, work practices affect what people do. And there are interactions between people, between technology, between equipment, and between the environment. And all of those interactions and flow have an impact. Time. We talked about time earlier. Time is really important. A lot of decisions are time dependent, and it's often people look back in time. It was sort of like hindsight and say, which is never particularly useful, because what it usually is to sort of blame someone for making a mistake, and probably an individual, and that's really not helpful, because things take decisions at a particular time. I haven't referenced it here, but there's a piece of work that was done relating to the Manchester bombing a few years back, and related to how the hospital responded to that event, and how they made those decisions in real time, in that emergency. If I remember the name of the author, I'll put it into the chat. And that there is also variability in terms of performance, and work conditions change, and the interactions change, and there's often a trade-off in those things. And often, such as an efficiency thoroughness trade-off. I can either do this quickly and get it done, or I can do it properly and I can do it thoroughly. And there's a trade-off throughout healthcare of those sorts of things happening all the time. So STEW has been a very useful approach to a lot of people have taken to understanding how sociotechnical systems work and can be applied to work. And Duncan McNabb, who's very much his paper is 2020 was part of this. And in fact, Duncan, I was a co-author on a paper he's just written around acute kidney injury, using a thing called FRAM as well as STEW, which is the McNabb 2026 paper. It was very worth having a good look at. Duncan's brilliant on this stuff. Next slide, please. And we're going to talk about actor network theory, which is something which I have not actually used, but is an approach taken by a lot of researchers, and in some respects is a foundational thing to socio-technical approaches. Next slide, please. I have a book on my bookshelf just here, which is basically about a group of sociologists going and spending 2 weeks or whatever, how much time they spent in Switzerland and back in the 80s, and then coming up with actor network theory. And some of those sociologists were Michael Callan, and Latour, and John Law, and others. And actor network theory was to try and understand what socio-technical systems were and try and get what was happening within those systems. Latour decided, or came up with this idea, that things are co-produced by humans and technology, that you can't have the sort of one or the other. The idea of a dualism between humans and non-human actors was thinking of them as separate entities. And so he and Callum put together the idea that this was, it was part of a network, and it was part of that they were both shaping each other. So both humans and technology shape each other through what's known as technical mediation. And they, that there's a sort of, because of that, there's a sort of, to achieve goals of action, they act as the properties of the technology, the properties of the human come together to shape each other. Technology will shape what the human actor does. The human actor will using the technology will shape what can be achieved by that technology. And that way, the action is not simply a property of human beings, but the combination of this human and non-human agents in this system that Latour refers to as associations. And it's the associations and the consequent actions that are woven together in a complex social order, the network, that creates that. And as when networks then become stable, processes they can define problems, and they can find solutions from that. Actor network is built upon a background that objects have agency, and that's one of the difficulties within it. But there's some interesting research that's been done around actor network. If we can move to the next slide, please. There's a few little bits and pieces here that are worth having a look at. But one of these papers that I did want to just very briefly touch on that I did read is the cardiotocography for intrapartum fetal monitoring, the Jepson 2003 paper. And they took an actor network approach, and they found that basically the technologies were sort of almost like a character within the network, and the technologies allowed for different roles within the network. So the technology was either a babysitter, because the technology is monitoring the mother during birth, as I understand. So it could be a babysitter, it could be the midwife's partner, it could be an agent of shared responsibility, it could be something which covers your back, or it could be a disturber of normal birth, or it could be a requested guest. So it was conceptualized by the midwives as this sort of thing. So that's a real great example of how technology is a part of a network. It is part of and becomes a thing within it. It's not a neutral thing within that's just being used by humans. And there's a few other things. And all, as I say, all these are referenced right at the end as well. Can you move to the next slide, please, Sobia? I'm going to talk about strong structuration theory, which draws out of actor network theory and structuration theory. So if you move to the next slide, we can look at that. Again, this is a way of examining the social technical aspects of healthcare. It draws from Giddings, which is some pretty heavy theory, actually, Giddings. I was going to say I wouldn't recommend going to read him in the original, but he's not quite as bad as some theoreticians. But Giddings had basically the idea that there are structures within society. There are social norms, there are political and economic institutions, and then there is people's agency. And this dualism of structure and agency is really important to that. And it's also, strong structuration theory is also drawn upon actor network theory, because it understands things as being reciprocal within that network. But in contrast to Latour, the theoretical position here is that there is not a symmetry between humans and technology, that technology is not seen as an equal actor within the system. There is a quadripartite approach: external and internal structures, agent knowledge, and agent active agency, and it's those things that produce and reproduce reality. Let's move to the next slide, please. So if everyone can see this, this is basically an explanation of how strong saturation sees the world, if you like. So we have external structures, which are the physical, the social, the economic, the context, the broader, big context into which technology is implemented. Within that, we have also internal structures. We have, which are the person's knowledge, their dispositions, and Stones and Greenhay added a technological aspect to this. So people act because they take the wider context, their external and their internal structures, the two structures, their knowledge of what's going on, their dispositions, and that produces an action which leads to an outcome. So it's the combination of the internal structures, the external structures, the wider context, people's knowledge of that, people's, if you like, general disposition, what Bourdieu would call habitus, and the agency which leads further onwards. We can go to the next slide. We can talk about some research that I did in using strong saturation theory. Sorry, next slide, please, Sabia. Thank you. And so I used, firstly, some other research. The one in here I would highlight is Trish Greenhay's work on Choose and Book. Trish, if you can remember, I suppose it must be 10, 12 years ago that Choose and Book came out, which is a referral pathway, a referral system, which basically patients were given options of choosing where they went once they were referred to a specialist in primary care. And by and large, one of the big things that there was massive resistance to it, and one of the big reasons that they found within this study was that this leached out any professional expertise. So rather than having a doctor say, well, actually, the best place for you to go to is this for this particular condition that I'm referring you to secondary care for, it was left to a patient, and the patient would just not know, and they wouldn't have the understanding and knowledge. And if you think of a strong saturation theory, they hadn't got those internal structures to understand what the wider structures were. They were struggling within that to and then act upon what they could do. So that's a really piece. I mean, I think there's a massive report in the Health Foundation on it, but you could also go to the paper, which again is cited towards the end. It's a really, really, really useful paper to read, and it has a lot of stuff around sociotechnical theory. Be really, really helpful. Next slide, please. So this is some work that we did around a audit and feedback system in primary care for prescribing safety, and we used strong saturation theory to try and understand what was happening there. Again, this was a system that gave different stakeholders access to real-time anonymized patient data and stuff around blood tests and test results and about what medicines they were on. And we did some qualitative work with some focus groups and some interviews. Next slide, please. And this is sort of what we found. That the material properties of the technology, those externals, there was properties within the technology, like I talked about with the social materiality. The properties were that they could identify patients really quickly. People described it as being a clever system. There were external structures that were impacting upon whether people used that. National guidelines and targets, things to report back on. The internal structures, often the motivations of people to meet certain benchmarks, but there was also a lot of internal, a lot of stuff coming out from the CCG, and there was different users within that. And the dispositions of those users, the habits of the users. So pharmacists use it differently to GPs. CCG, those, and this is going back when we had CCGs, about 10 years or so ago. they used it in different ways. They used it to monitor what was going on. So it was used in different ways. There were almost like there were many different systems layered upon layered around using this audit and feedback system. And it was basically with the most important thing was that the context and that complex mix of users, the relationships, the interactions, the different policy backgrounds, and the conventions and the norms that really, really impacted upon how it was used. One of the things I was thinking about earlier this morning was within structuration theory, one of the important things is to get those multiple perspectives, but get them in multiple ways. So to do focus groups, to do interviews, to perhaps do some observation work, to perhaps to also look at the policy backgrounds. And I think that's something which is really useful for any of this research going forward. Let's move to the next slide, please. So implications for patient, what does this all mean for patient safety research? And I think there are broad things I'm going to talk about here. Next slide, please. So that's just cutting back. We've had this slide before, but I wanted to put it in here again to re-emphasize this focus upon everything as interdependent and reciprocal. Don't, in terms of both intervention and implementation, and in our evaluation of that, don't look at a fix of one part without looking at the whole context, as we did with that audit and feedback system, and help understand that technology, the system into which it is implemented, that broader, wider system, the socio-technical systems that you were all coming up with in your breakout rooms. Next slide, please. Problems and solutions. I think I read a paper that was published last year when I was preparing this talk, which I have not cited because I'm not going to reveal who it was by. And it talked about the only solution was to fix the technology. And it was a recent paper around the use of a particular part of technology in healthcare, and the only solution was seen to improve the technology. And this is where I think we need to move away from the idea that we need to improve the technology, or we train the users better and everything will be fine. I think we need to move on from that. Next slide, please. So I think we need to move to ideas that technology, away from ideas that technology is fixed and stable. We need to move to the sense that intervention system design will not just solve the problems. It's not the only solution to that. There are other solutions around context, around work practices, around everything else, and about understanding what is happening within those systems. Need to move to research that's based upon the idea of technology acceptance or interoperability, and simple solutions that training and adaptation of users will change everything. None of that, I think, is nuanced enough. And I think we need to look at context and organization, culture, social norms, variability, those relationships, those interactions. Next slide, please. I think one of the things, and as someone who is in their 7th decade, that I find challenging, shall we say, within some of the technological implementation is this assumption that older users wouldn't be able to use technology. That well, we design an app, they wouldn't understand it, they wouldn't know the internet, they wouldn't be able to resist, they'd be resistant to technology. And within that, then that becomes that they're the problem. The older people are the problem, not the context, not the system, not what's happening within it, and that there is, that we need to just change older people, or just train older people, or get their grandchildren to do it for them. And there you have a lovely picture of a 70-year-old man there. That is exactly a 70-year-old man. In fact, he turns 71 next month. And if you go to the next slide, we'll find out who that 70-year-old man is. Yes, that 70-year-old man, I hope people have noticed, is Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who is was the inventor of the World Wide Web. So I don't think Sir Tim Berners-Lee, as a 70-year-old man, has a problem with technology. And I think, it's quite a clumsy example of mine, but it's an example to prove that, let's go away from some of those stereotypes. But those stereotypes lead into a blame the user, or blame the problem is the user rather than the problem is something else. And Sir Tim's looking very charming there. And let's move on to the next slide. Next, sorry, thank you, Sabia. So I also wondered whether, as we finish off here, whether it's just about, is context everything? Is it about that unpredictability and emergence of complex systems? Is it all about the fact that, they're very nuanced, they're all very different? One of the things I think is really, really important, and there is quite a lot of work out there. I think the Papuzzi paper I cite there about co-designing stuff with co-users and also with patients. I think there's quite a lot of stuff that's happened around the co-design of apps. I know with patients, I think some people at Warwick may well be doing something similar around that. Helen Atherton at Warwick, I think, and others maybe doing some work around sort of co-design of apps with people. I think that's really important to have co-design in both implementation and evaluation. Local solutions, understanding that maybe context, patient safety cultures. I said to, I was, for the current project I work on, we met with a patient and care advisory group, and I talked about how my work, and I talked about how I said how patient safety is achieved. And I think patient safety is achieved within culture and within context and within social norms. I don't think patient safety happens just by putting some technology in. I think it's achieved through all of that thing. I think it's through those social practices and social process. And technology does make safety happen. But it also can undermine it. And it's also about making sure it does it right. Next slide, please. And maybe we do have, maybe there's too much technology. Many of you would have come across Deborah Lupton's work on the quantized self, which is the sort of idea that we're measuring ourselves and monitoring ourselves so much, and that we've become a sort of like everything is measurable, and if it's measurable, then we ought to be doing it, and we ought to be having that technological approach. And maybe this is part of that sort of overburdening people. Maybe it's creating some of that sort of industrialization of healthcare. I was at the Society of Academic Primary Care conference last year, and I say last year, it might have been the year before, and Victor Montori was one of the keynotes, and he was talking about a lot of this, about how maybe we need to step back and have a more holistic approach. Next slide, please. I think we'll do this. We've got 10 minutes, but maybe we should do this in the chat rather than we can do hands up if people want to. But I'd just like people to sort of like, before we finish off, just perhaps for a couple of minutes just to reflect. And so what do you think? I mean, I might have been talking rubbish, I don't know. But what are your thoughts around this? Or what has that been helpful? Or has that been of not just a feedback to me about that, but what do you think about this? If people just pop things in the chat about their thoughts around sociotechnical theory and its use of patient safety, that would be fantastic. Oh yes, questions as well. Perfect. So I have a question here, which is from Misha. How best could you analyze patient safety or social? Yeah, I mean, I think I would take a very holistic approach to using. I think if you're using the questionnaire, that would be, that's fine. But I would also then mix that with some other, some interviewing stuff, or some focus group or observational work. There are human factors frameworks out there. I've not touched on human factors today because it's not really where I am. I mean, I've worked with several people who are human factors. I think I saw Adam was on the call earlier, and who have more experience in human factors than I. But I mean, there are frameworks you can use. There are we've actually used normalization process theory within this sort of work. And I think it's not so much what you're using, it's more about why you're using it to get what are you looking to achieve. If you're looking to understand what's going on in the system, I don't think it matters what you do. I think as long as you have that eye to the system and not trying to understand different bits of it, but it's a systems approach, then I think it's fine. Thank you, Misha. Any other comments or questions or observations or thoughts? Anything you can think of? Beth.
Thanks, Mark. I think that was just outstanding. I enjoyed it so much. And I was thinking about some of the research that's come out recently about the introduction of electronic patient records into secondary care, and you framing it around the actor network theory and some of the literature is been fascinating, because really people are finding increasingly, and it's more for nurses and pharmacists, for example, that the move to electronic records has completely changed the nature of the care that's delivered.
Yeah.
It's less at the bedside.
Yes.
Pharmacists, particularly on wards, I think, find that they spend all their time now behind computers. There's no going to the patient bedside, looking at the notes, talking to patients. I think nurses are wheeling round computers on wheels, aren't they? And which don't often get in and out of rooms. So you might design technology, but you're not designing the structures of buildings to be able to accommodate the technology. So if you can't get a computer into a ward or into a bay, then that computer's not going with you, and you're probably not going to the bay as much either, because all your work is now about signing things off on computer systems and following workflows. So it's completely changed the nature of how care is delivered without really any preparation for that. And I think I've been thinking about this a lot, but there is a history of nursing literature around knowing the patient. So you'd know them in a number of different ways. You'd know them from their patient history. You'd know them from talking to them. You'd know them from the medicines they were on, for example. But I think that the technology's completely changed how staff know their patients. And I don't think we're prepared for it. We're really not.
I think that's absolutely right. And certainly with a lot of the work I've done with pharmacy research with pharmacists, that sitting behind the computer stuff is very much the case now. And I think it is perhaps breaking away the holistic care. In that last bit of that I was talking about there, the stuff around industrialized care and the too much medicine, which I think you'll know quite a lot from the work people have done over in your way in Yorkshire. Absolutely, totally agree. And I think that's Anna has put a thing in the chat about the example of older people having difficulty with technology, perhaps does blame the users, but also highlight technology often designed with or for a variety of technological literacy amongst users. Absolutely, totally agree. And I think it's not just necessarily the example that we don't have the let's not be sort of like think old people can't use it, but also we do have to have some understanding that there are different literacies about use from users too. And that work that it's Rachel Spencer and Helen Atherton and others are doing at Warwick is, I think, around that sort of stuff. Personal physicist. Yes, I think that reactiveness about systems is really, really a thing. I think that is. I think there are not seeing things ahead, and therefore, and I think that goes right back to that first quotation from that novel I read. we don't think ahead in terms of what we're going to achieve. This push from NHS digitalisation, it's been the same for the last 20, 50 years or so. is always sort of like, let's innovate without thinking of what those unintended consequences might be. Yeah, and I agree absolutely, Sanchia. The number of metrics you can report on is, the more you can report, and the more tests you can do, the more you'll do them, and sometimes for what reason. And I think that's I think having everything available to us electronically or digitally does provide us with those options. Yeah, but not necessarily taking it in the right way or doing it for the right reasons. That's brilliant. Thank you. Have we exhausted everybody? Oh, we've got... some lovely thank yous. Thank you. You're too kind. I'm glad it's been really useful. Yeah, I'm glad it's going to be useful for your PhD, Brooke. That's brilliant. Yes, absolutely. I'm on all platforms. I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on LinkedIn, and also my email is probably somewhere, and I'm happy. It's not. I don't think I've actually put my email on the slides, but it's. But if you search Mark Jeffries Manchester, you'll find it, or alternatively, we can put it into the slides when we send them out or something. But yeah, I'm very happy to be contacted.
Excellent. Well, Mark, I think, on behalf of SafetyNet, I would really like to thank you for an absolutely fantastic talk. It was a tour de force, and I think just the messages coming into the chat just show how useful people have found it. So just to let people know that this session will be on our Sobia, does it go on the SafetyNet or does it go on the YouTube channel? Probably on both.
Yeah, that's right.
So it goes on both, so people can access this and look back at it, which will be incredibly helpful. And I think Mark has kindly agreed that the slides can be shared. So just on behalf of SafetyNet, I thank you to Mark, and on behalf of everybody here too. And Mark's now just put his
just put my email in the chat.
Email address in the chat too. So yeah, if you want to contact Mark, please do, but don't inundate him. We've got other things to do. So we'll let you all know of up and coming patient safety 101s, and also don't forget to look out for the SafetyNet seminars, which are coming thick and fast, I think, and they're all incredibly useful to you. Right, so yeah, I wish you all a fantastic day. The sun is beginning to break through here in Yorkshire after a miserable 24 hours. So it's started to warm up, and I hope it is wherever you are too. So goodbye, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you.